Tellico, Ellis County, Texas, the 29th of July, 1993. The blazing sun was beating down on Tellico, and the blistering heat was relentless, as were the mosquitoes. On Cut-Off Road, an isolated part of Tellico, connected by an old wooden bridge that went over Smith Creek, a road crew was out working in the area, smoothing over the gravel. Everything seemed normal, but this regular sunny day would soon turn into one of the darkest the area had ever seen, and the lives of so many would be forever changed. Hidden amongst the bushes, the road crew came across the naked body of a young girl. She had been stabbed, shot, decapitated, disemboweled, and mutilated. Her whole body was covered in injuries, and her clothes were nowhere to be found. One of the workers stayed with the body while another ran to get help. The police were soon at the scene, and even for the most experienced of officers, this case was so brutal it made them sick to their stomachs. As horrific as this was, it was about to get worse. Lying 200 feet away from this body, under the bridge over Smith Creek, was another. This was the body of a young boy, lying face down. He had been shot with a .22 caliber pistol, and there were 2 gunshot wounds to his head. In order to retrieve his body, the Tellico Fire Department arrived to help. When searching the body of the boy, they found a library card in his wallet with the name James Brian King on it. It wasn't a photographic ID, so could have belonged to someone else, but it did give them something to work with. Trying to identify the body of the girl was significantly harder. She had been decapitated, so couldn't be traced via dental records. Her hands had been cut off, so fingerprints were impossible too. A rape test kit was carried out, and this showed no evidence of a sexual assault, but her clothes had been removed. The pathologist would later say that this was one of the worst cases of mutilation that she had seen in her line of work, and the nature of her injuries suggested that the killer had stayed with the body for a while after death. The police officers investigating spread out over the area to perform searches and gather clues, and on one barbed wire fence they found something that immediately caught their eye. Several blonde hairs were found tangled in the wire. They were taken away to be examined. That night, as they were still trying to identify the children, officers made some calls to other police departments and discovered that 2 children had been reported missing. One of them was called James Brian King, known as Brian. Investigators tracked down his family and went to the house to show his parents the library card and wallet, hoping they could confirm or deny that it did belong to their son. His father took one look at it and said that he had purchased this for his son. They had to give him the news that is every parent's worst nightmare. This wallet had been found in the pocket of a deceased young boy. His father said that the young girl whose body had been found nearby could possibly be that of his stepdaughter, Christina Benjamin, who was 13 years old, but due to the condition her body had been found in, he couldn't be certain. He told officers that just a couple of nights prior, Brian had been asleep in the hammock at the front of the property, which was something he hadn't done before. Then, out of nowhere, a tan-coloured car pulled up and began to sound its horn. When his father went to the window, he saw his son talking to the driver of a tan-coloured Subaru, whose face he couldn't make out. Someone was in the back seat and had long, light-coloured hair. He went to the bathroom, and by the time he came back, Brian had opened the passenger door, got in, and the car had driven off and out of sight. His father waited for around an hour for his son to come back, but Brian didn't. His dad went to bed thinking he would talk to his son about it in the morning. When he awoke the following day, the family discovered that Christina was also missing. Trying not to panic, they waited to see if they came back. Maybe they had just lost track of time, but there was no sign of them. After conducting a search that failed to yield any results, their family reported them as missing to the police. Christina slept in the same room as her little sister, and she had something important to tell the officers. On the night they had gone missing, Brian had come into their room, and he and Christina had snuck out. It appeared to be something that had been pre-arranged. The officers took one of Christina's hairbrushes away from the house in order to compare hair from it to the hair found in the barbed wire at the crime scene. Analysis showed them to be a match. It was Christina's hair in the wire. Her family also gave police an X-ray that had been done recently on Christina following an injury to her foot. This was a match to an X-ray taken of the body. The news was completely devastating. Crimes like this just didn't happen in Tellico. At the medical examiner's office, more thorough examinations were conducted on Brian King's trousers, and they found a blonde hair that did not belong to Christina. On the bottom of his shoe, a fibre was found that was incredibly hard to see with the naked eye. It was a tan fibre from a vehicle, possibly a Japanese make and model. His father had seen him getting into a tan-coloured Subaru. The bodies were already in a state of decomposition due to the brutal Texas heat, and by analysing the flies and insects on them, they were able to determine that they had been there for around 2 days before their bodies were found. This also matched the time that the car picked up Brian. To try and make the picture clearer, the police spoke to the Behavioural Science Investigative Support Unit and gave them photographs from the scene of the crime and a description of what it was they had found. The profilers said that they did not believe this to be a crime that was sexually motivated, something that seemed odd considering Christina had been stripped. They said that the person responsible likely had a history of abusing animals. This was someone who got a thrill and enjoyment out of harming and mutilating. This would be someone who removed things from the scene of the crime to keep them as trophies. They said that the killer would be antisocial and organised, with access to a car and a history of substance and alcohol abuse. Christina had been the target of this murder, fueled by rage and hatred. When talking to the neighbours, the police got a major lead. They were told that on the night they had gone missing, the pair had been due to go out with their friend called Jason. Then a call came into the sheriff's office. It was an anonymous call. The person on the other end of the phone said that they needed to be looking at a young man called Jason Massey. Jason Massey was 20 years old, of no fixed address, and had dropped out of high school. When talking to his friends to try and build up a picture of him, they offered some deeply disturbing information. Jason was someone who enjoyed hurting and mutilating animals. He would decapitate them and refer to them as trophies. He would keep the heads of the animals he killed in a metal cooler. He also had a long list of criminal convictions, including stalking, harassment, and abuse towards animals. Just a few days before the bodies of Brian and Christina were found, a call had been made to the police stating that a dead calf had been found at the back of the local McDonald's. It had been killed and mutilated. When the police arrived, they found a bracelet on the ground, with the name Jason engraved on it, and a tan-coloured Subaru was there too. Someone had been seen running from the scene, and they were later able to identify him. It was Jason Massey. He had been born in 1973 to a single mother who would leave him in the car while she went out drinking, and when his little sister was born, nothing changed. His childhood lacked stability and his family moved about constantly, living in the car at one point. The children would be left on their own for extended periods of time. Their mother was violent with both of them, and she would hide food from them too. If they tried to eat anything, they were beaten with a paddle or a belt. It was reported that just before he started school, a male babysitter also sexually abused Jason. As he got older, his violence began to manifest. When he was just 9 years old, he killed his first animal by strangling a cat to death and then mutilating it. He also restrained and beat another boy with a tree branch. As he got older, he began to abuse various substances and consume lots of alcohol. Another disturbing incident had taken place in 1992, when he held a knife to a young girl with the intent of committing sexual assault. But he was disturbed when her mother came home and threw him out. He later wrote about how important that day was for him, and although no more harm came to her at his hands, he was eager to start killing. Seemingly angered that his attempt to hurt her had failed, he went out alone to the woods and symbolically buried the girl in question in secret. One of his diary entries read, "My life, it's been about chasing girls, finding the one to rape and kill. Rape is not enough. I must have a body for the next day or two, to hold, talk to and make love. Bones to talk with." In spring of 1993, police stopped Jason and found not only drugs and a knife in his car, but a cat with a rope wrapped around its neck. Reports do differ as to whether or not the cat survived. A diary was also found with names ticked off next to them. He tracked the animals he had killed: 7 cows, 32 dogs, and 41 cats. One entry read that he wanted to grab society by the throat and shake them with terror until they're awake and realise what's up, so they will remember who I am, when and why I came their way. He said he wanted to become a murder machine, and that just thinking of killing a lot of young girls makes me happy. He was sentenced to 120 days in prison, but was released early. While there was a lot of circumstantial evidence against Jason, there was nothing to forensically link him to the crime scene. Jason Massey was taken in for questioning. The officer presented him with a series of photographs of Christina's body, and Jason began to violently retch. The officer would later say that he knew he had hit a nerve with Jason. As the investigations continued, they discovered that roughly 10 days before Brian and Christina went missing, A man called Christopher had been in the car with his friend, Jason. Christopher was friends with Christina and told Jason to drive over to see her. Jason apparently flirted with Christina, and she said to him she wanted to sneak out sometime. He told her that he would come by her house in his car and sound his horn. That would be her signal to leave the house and go to an old gas station on I-45 and wait there for him. When Jason and Christopher left, Jason spoke about Christina in a very disturbing and sexually graphic way, saying he wanted to kill her and mutilate her. Jason also told his friend that if ever there was a serial killer operating in the neighbourhood, it would be him. Christopher would later say that he hadn't taken much notice of what Jason had said. Jason spoke like this a lot. The police talked to another girl, also named Christina, and she had seen Jason on the evening of the 26th of July. She said that he had left after 11, and that he had been acting incredibly strangely. Her sister said that she had seen Jason with handcuffs and a firearm. Following a search warrant, samples of his hair were taken and his Subaru was impounded. A sample of the carpet from the car was taken too. They found staining on the seat, and when they tested it, it was revealed to be bloodstains, as were spots on the steering wheel and on a knife in the glove box. When looking in the trunk, more clues were revealed. A roll of tape and a leaf, both of which had bloodstains on them. A small axe and a hammer, which also appeared to have blood on it too. There was a hunting knife, a screwdriver, a wrench and a pair of handcuffs. Although there was no sign of the gun, there was a receipt documenting a purchase for some .22 caliber bullets. Due to the state of the bodies, they could not use DNA analysis to compare the blood found in Jason's car and on the items in the vehicle too, but they were not prepared to give up that easily. Using reverse paternity genotyping, which compared Christina and Brian's parents to the DNA in the blood spots, they were able to determine that the blood had most likely come from Christina. In late July, someone who owned the local car wash had witnessed Jason driving his Subaru into the car wash at around 11:30 p.m. Jason put several items into the rubbish bin and proceeded to reverse out, but when he saw the owner watching him, he drove back in and started to vacuum the interior of his vehicle and thoroughly clean it. Not long after, the owner saw a newspaper article about the bodies being found and recognised Jason's photo as someone who might be connected to the crime. The police went straight to the car wash and took apart the vacuum there to see if it would reveal more secrets, and it did. They found a card for Jason's probation officer, broken glass from the car, a receipt from a KFC with Jason's name on it, and several hairs. Long, blonde hairs. These hairs and the hairs from his vehicle were tested. They were microscopically similar to the hairs found in the barbed wire, which had already been found to be Christina's. The fibre found on Brian's shoe also came back as a match to Jason's Subaru, and the hair on his trousers came back as belonging to Jason Massey. During the investigation, the police discovered that Jason's cousin owned a .22 caliber gun that was kept at his grandmother's house. He had no idea that Jason had taken it. There were a few witnesses who said they had seen Jason with the gun in question, and the staff member from Walmart who sold him the .22 caliber bullets, a pair of handcuffs and 2 knives, was able to pick the person they had sold the items to out of a lineup. They picked Jason Massey. When police conducted a search of his home, the evidence continued to stack up. There was a box of knives, 2 articles about the killings, and a pair of handcuffs. On the 17th of March 1994, Jason Massey was indicted on 2 counts of capital murder. He entered a plea of not guilty. His trial began on the 28th of September 1994. It was put forward that at around midnight on the 27th of July, both Christina and Brian had climbed into Jason's car for a ride. The prosecutors said that on the cut-off road bridge, Jason had brought the car to a stop and used the .22 caliber gun to shoot Brian twice in the head at point-blank range. To get his body out of the car, he had pushed him out and over the bridge. Terrified, Christina had got out of the car and ran for her life. But Jason chased after her, and using the same gun, he shot at her and hit her in the back. The wound wasn't life-threatening, but after she fell, he caught up to her. He then shot her in the head. He proceeded to stab and mutilate her body after she had died. He was referred to as a lust killer, someone who derived sexual pleasure from murder and mutilation. A state psychologist testified during the trial and said that Jason had received treatment at the Dallas Psychiatric Intensive Care Unit in June of 1991, when he was 18 years old. He had been brought in by his mother after she had found his diaries and was deeply worried about the contents of them. The psychiatrist also said that Jason suffered from antisocial personality disorder and that he posed a danger to the public. The doctor said that there were no treatments that would work for someone like Jason, and the threat he posed and the risk of him committing murder was extremely high. Jason would ultimately leave the hospital as other doctors examined him and didn't agree with the prognosis. After his release, Jason wrote, "The system had one chance, so what can I say? It's not my fault. After reading all the shit in those 2 books, they had a reason to get a court order to get me some help." Dr. Clay Griffith also testified that someone like Jason, with antisocial personality disorder as severe as his, would pose an extraordinary danger to the public and could not be rehabilitated. Jason's teacher from the 9th grade would also testify, as would one of his former classmates. Both of them said that Jason had made frequent comments about murder and that he idolised Charles Manson. His classmate said that he had become infatuated with her, but she did not reciprocate his feelings. She had received phone calls from him as well as letters, saying that he dreamt of killing her. He continued to stalk her and harass her. Her dog would later be killed and the blood smeared all over her vehicle. Jason wrote about this incident in his diary. One of his former friends would tell the court that Jason had an obsession with starting fires and would often talk about killing and hurting animals, calling it an adrenaline rush, a high, a turn-on, a love to mutilate. Christopher, the man who had been there when Christina and Jason met, and who had heard him saying he wanted to kill Christina, also testified in court and told them about what he had witnessed. The defence argued that this testimony was born out of a grudge, as Jason had approached the former girlfriend of one of Christopher's friends. Christopher admitted that it was true that he didn't like Jason, which did hurt the impact of his testimony. Jason's defence said that the investigation was not complete and not all potential suspects had been looked at. He added that the physical evidence was not conclusive, it was based on probability. He said that there had been someone else in the car that night when Brian was seen talking to the driver, and anybody else who was there could have been the killer. The defence questioned the lead investigator and argued that nobody else from the car had been identified, and nobody else had ever been looked into. As the proceedings carried on, one of the defence attorney's team received a call and had to leave the courtroom immediately. The news was shocking. During a walk in the woods, a hunter had found a metal cooler. Inside was not someone's discarded snacks and drinks. It contained 31 skulls of animals that had been mutilated and killed. That was not all. It contained several diaries called Slayer Books of Death, the thoughts of Jason Massey written on the front. They were dated from 1989 to 1993 and detailed his gruesome thoughts and feelings. They showed him to be someone obsessed with mutilation, sex and murder, especially when it came to young girls. One entry from the 19th of January 1991 detailed that he had tried to murder his then girlfriend but had failed. "I'm tired of feeling like shit for not being able to kill," one quote read. His diaries also described how he didn't want to get caught for his crimes, and how he had read about the investigative procedures so as to avoid detection. The defence said, Jason Massey was not born a capital murderer. He was a baby, he wanted a dad, he wanted love. Instead, he got rejection and he got hit. Prosecutor Clay Strange said it's impossible to assign a motive to a case like this. I think he did it because it was pleasurable to him. It's almost a miracle we caught him as quickly in his career as we did. He's as evil as anybody I've ever encountered. I've met a lot of people meaner, but no one more evil. After the trial concluded and both sides had presented their evidence, it was time for the jury to deliberate. Jason Massey was found guilty of murder.
Mr. Massey, any comment on your guilty conviction?
No, ma'am, I'm just glad it's over.
One of the punishments on the table was the death penalty, and the state had just 24 hours to put their case together to argue for it. They used extracts from his diaries to show not only the scale of his cruelty towards animals, but also that he had planned to kill multiple times. One extract read that he wanted to be the most well-known serial killer in the country. During this part of the proceedings, someone else would come forward, a man called Paul. He was the one who had made the anonymous call to the police telling them to look at Jason Massey. He was one of Jason's old associates, and they had spoken about raping girls and took drugs together. They took part in an armed robbery and killed animals with each other too. When he heard about what had happened to Christina and Brian, he decided to call the police. He was able to identify the handwriting from the diaries as belonging to Jason. Paul said since then he had become a Christian and was getting counselling, leaving his old life behind. Jason's sister also testified and described their highly dysfunctional and abusive upbringing, but said that in spite of all of it, she had not turned out like him. The jury took just 15 minutes to agree on the punishment. Jason Massey was subsequently sentenced to death. He was to be executed by lethal injection, and the judge said that his death would be more merciful and humane than that of Brian and Christina. These words from the judge prompted cheers from the court. As he was led away to death row, he said that he had put Christina's dismembered body parts into a pillowcase and thrown them into the river, but not many believed him. He was someone who liked to keep trophies. He would later appeal against his sentence. He tried to have the transcript reviewed and said that he had been found guilty of only one count of murder and therefore should not have received the death penalty. He said his attorney was incompetent and was trying to get me killed by default. The Canadian Coalition Against the Death Penalty said that the police had failed to look at other potential suspects and that the defence had not called anyone to testify as to Jason's mental health at the time. They said that the judge appeared bored and disinterested throughout the proceedings. The case was appealed on 24 separate counts of trial error, but they were thrown out on the grounds of the submitted records being unfinished and incorrect. Jason Massey was out of options. His appeals had failed. His original sentence still stood. For the years that he sat on death row, Jason refused to reveal where Christina's head and hands were, and in spite of more searches, they were never found. In an interview from death row, Jason said, "As we grow up, we change. I have a lot of anger about the stupid mistakes I made, and at the same time I recognise anger is just an emotion." Brian's dad, James, called Jason the devil, adding, "He would have been worse than Ted Bundy." The 3rd of April, 2001. 28-year-old Jason Massey was taken from his cell at 6 p.m. to the Huntsville unit's death chamber. He was strapped to a gurney and the curtain was pulled back for those watching, which included Christina's grandparents. His final words included the following: "First, I would like to speak to the victim's family. I can't imagine what I've taken from you all, but I do want to apologise, and I want to let you know that I did do it. You guys know that I am guilty and I'm sorry for what I have done. I apologise and I know that you may not be able to forgive me, but I hope sometime in the future you will be able to find it in you to forgive me. I want you to know that Christina, she did not suffer as much as you think she did. I promised you that, I give you my word. I know you guys want to know where the rest of her remains are. I put her remains in the Trinity River. I have said that since I have come to death row. I know that God has used this to change my life, and it's all been worth it because of that. If I lie here today where I lie, I can say in the face of death, Jesus is Lord. That is all I want to say. I love you all and I won't say goodbye. I will say I will see you again. Tonight I dance on the streets of gold. Let those without sin cast the first stone." His time of death was announced at 6:20 p.m, 8 minutes after the drugs were administered. Christina's grandmother, who had witnessed his execution, said she could not judge Jason Massey, but she would never forgive him. The murders of Brian King and Christina Benjamin rocked this little community and left a lasting impression on those who investigated it. The horrors of what they suffered on that night in July 1993 are too awful to even think about, and the indignity they suffered after death is just as appalling. Brian's sister said that Jason Massey's death was quick and painless. He was lucky. My brother and my stepsister weren't so lucky.